You're right on time for another episode of Jasiri, your one-stop shop, or should I say your one-stop show for conversations that matter to you about the issues that matter to you. Today, we're looking into the increase in rates of femicide in Nigeria. Our guest is someone who has been on the front lines of the conversation around gender-based violence. But before we get too deep into that, I was sitting down with the first celebrity guest co-host we had on the show, Annie, and she asked me a question that really made me think. It made me sit back and think, and it took me a few minutes to answer her. And she said, Tab, T-A-B, my nickname, is your life going according to plan? Ladies, I said I cannot answer this question by myself. Even if my voice is like a froggy frog. I'm surprised you guys have kept a straight face. Everybody I've talked to this morning has just been like, and then they start laughing. So please, apologies in advance. But is your life going according to the plan you had? I won't even say the plan at 16. Let's even say the plan you had maybe at 20, 21, 22. What's the answer? My God, have I made these ladies speechless today? Who wants to go first? Don't rush to answer.
I think for me, it's going better than I planned. Yeah.
You've always been weird.
No, actually, I was about to answer. I was like, wait, is the planning not still going on? Are you not still in the planning stage?
So because I am a very spiritual person, right? So I got to a point where I realized that my plans are not up to what I am experiencing, and it's it's going better, and it can get even better. I decided to just hands off. So now I hardly have plans. I only prepare, do the best I can in the present for whatever is coming in the future. And it's been a beautiful journey. I think I like it.
So what exactly is the plan? Is there marriage in the plan? Is there kids? Is there another degree?
Don't worry.
Because
the answer is on her face.
Oh, the answer is on her face. Oh my.
The answer was just
it's fine.
smack there.
I can make arrangement for that eventually.
Did you see that? Did you
It's by the side.
That's the answer was right there.
Catherine, what about you?
I don't know about
Lola,
according to plan. Don't go there. Don't go there. Well, Lola, I don't know about according to plan. But I think everybody, and we can say so, everybody takes it a step at a time, a day at a time, and you can plan, like you say, and it doesn't pan out to how you planned it. So you make adjustments along the way. But I can't complain where I am now. I cannot complain.
I didn't see fuel scarcity there in the plan, but like, yeah.
I like that repeatedly, right? Lola, what about you?
For me, I think when you're younger, they encourage you to have dreams.
Yeah.
Sometimes dreams are just dreams, because our lives usually, from experience, I found out that the trajectory of our lives somehow feels written. And most of the time, you have no contributions to it. It just pushes you in a direction. So it's now that I'm of age that I told this line. When I was young, you think you can make plans that will take you in this trajectory.
Yeah.
No, I studied law. I'm not even doing anything with it. And I wanted to study theater arts, but my own family steered me in this direction.
And now find out where
and I
you
still
are.
moved in this direction.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think the best thing to do with life is to prepare yourself as an individual to take on whatever life brings.
I think that's interesting. So when I finally thought about it and I answered her, I told her I didn't have a plan. I know there are people who say by 22 I want to get married. I got married in my 30s. I had my first child in my 30s. Like, it just felt like somehow I was just going along and hitting these milestones, but I wasn't planning these milestones. And I've had this conversation with my sister. My sister says sometimes I walk through life not knowing that there's some kind of grace, because things that were meant to take me in this direction have just taken me. So I was meant to study law too. Found myself studying English literature, that I get an acceptance letter from my university for mass communication. So what's my business with mass communication? Me, I want to be sending people to jail. I want to be getting people law. That's what I wanted to do. And this is almost 20 years later, And so that thing just, it makes you think. But also I now realize that the plan wasn't one child. The plan wasn't this sort of later career progression. The plan is still a PhD. Yeah. I don't think, even from the grave, my father will probably haunt me if I don't have a doctor somewhere in my name. So I think the adjustments in life's planning is what many of us fail to roll with. So many people get tied up. I'm not married yet. I haven't built a house. I haven't had this child. I haven't traveled.
That in itself.
It then becomes a cage. Becomes a cage.
That in itself. It's
food for thought. I hope all of you are answering the same questions we're asking on the table, because it's a very crucial question. Because this thing you just explained so succinctly, some people are in cages right now. because of unhappiness, thinking that if I had, if I would have, and that's why they're where they are. And they don't know that this place you're at could be the best place you could ever be.
If you can accept it.
Exactly.
Accept it. And what I know a person, he never added to his life. Do you know why? He said his destiny was abroad.
Wow.
The last time I saw him, he had no degree, no life, no nothing.
He was
has
still waiting
applied
to travel.
for embassies more than, I don't know if I'm exaggerating, at least for the last time I saw him were in the late 90s, early 2000s. He had applied to embassies like 6 times.
So how is he doing now?
I do not know where he
So
is.
he's been tied to the plan that his life is in the abroad, and he refuses to put down any roots here.
I think, okay,
No,
go ahead.
see.
So I'm making you ladies think this morning. I like it.
Because I was thinking that I know that the young people.
Anybody that does young people and do like this again,
No,
it's not like what I was doing.
young people. What you go do? Young people.
young people.
Young people.
Young
That's
person
what
had a birthday
Gen Z
and
ambassador.
even eat crap.
I feel young people now are inclined to be more intentional about planning their lives, more
Really?
intentional, because they are the ones that sit down and without sentiments or emotions, looking at it strictly businessly, you're saying that maybe being in Nigeria is not going to work for me. I should now begin to be intentional about taking my future in my hands. So I think younger people are more intentional about living their lives according to plan than us, that we're steered in different directions by family and by...
So I wouldn't 100% agree. Yes, we are more intentional, right? But we're more intentional about living our lives, not exactly planning. Yes, so
Planning
the
your life.
intentionality comes with,
agree.
I find myself in the media space. I want to make the most of it. I want to get as much certification from this space as possible. If tomorrow I wake up and I start acting, I will make the most of it. Go to the film school in, is it New York or where? Just make the most of it. So we're intentional about living life as it comes, right? Enjoying.
Not necessarily
We're not
planning.
all about, yes, the ones that want to jackpot are even intentional about what they're doing before they go.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's not about, the intentionality is not about the trajectory of the life, because I feel like younger people understand, and that's one thing I appreciate, the necessity to enjoy every moment
Yeah.
of their life. Younger
Yeah.
people understand that sometimes your passion, the things that would make you
Yeah.
are birthed from the everyday moments, right? You realize that every day you like to talk, and then you're like, okay, you know what, I can be a public speaker. And they're not opposed to giving it a try. If they try and it doesn't work, they're intentional
They
about
will just
shifting
shelf it.
gears. They don't care what anybody
Yeah,
says. So
they
that's where
shift gears, they pivot
yes,
quickly.
that's where
Pivot is the word.
that's where the intentionality
But you
comes
know,
from.
even as I asked this question, I now realize that can you plan your life in this Nigeria?
Oh, yeah.
People who were in school and ended up graduating many years behind time because of strikes or whatever the issue was, and then you want to get into the job market, and the job market is asking for a 22-year-old. Meanwhile, you're 25. It's not your fault.
that-
You
Yeah.
graduated at 25. So it also becomes a conversation of, does even Nigeria allow you to plan a life?
The life. How can a bachelor in these times make plans for marriage? Do you know what the cost of accommodation in Lagos State is?
Right now,
Do you know how much people are earning? Plus life, plus black tax, plus all other things that are in their lives. And they still expect you to get additional degrees. They still expect you to show workings,
In
steals
9
of
months, bring
wine.
out a child.
All those things makes your life a little hard.
And I think we with a lot of expectations and hopes and plans, we kind of limit ourselves, because you hear, for example, young girls saying, "Oh, I want to marry a rich man." What if it's you that's supposed to be the rich person in the marriage? You know,
Exactly.
so like.
I don't let the men hear that.
I think
They'll
it's
come
too
for
late.
you.
Anyways, from everything that we've said, we understand that we run this race called life, but we sometimes forget to run it at our own pace, to run it on our own track. Now, piggybacking off what Tolu had asked, I think part of the issue is that we compare our plans to others, right? And one thing I've learned for a long time is a lot of people are winging it. Even successful people wing it. And I know I've often had to pull myself away from overanalyzing someone else's life and where they are to where I am. The question is to you, how do you deal with that? Do you plan your life, or do you go with the flow?
Or do you compare?
Or do you
See, let
compare?
me tell you, I have fallen into that spiral of maybe somebody I feel is like in my age group or my sort of situation. We have certain metrics that are the same. Then I'll just go on Instagram. This is why I say social media. I'll be
Yeah.
inspired. I'll be like, oh my God, they've had,
I think-
oh,
yeah,
they
I
bought
think
another
every-
house.
yeah,
Oh, they've
happens
gone
to
on vacation. I'll be
everybody.
thinking,
Yeah.
okay, but I haven't. And my God, it takes a lot
honestly.
to pull myself out and be like, you know what? You guys are on 2 different places. You're running 2 different races. You're facing 2 different issues. You don't even know what it is. I remember when I was on radio and I used to do something called I can't remember that it was very popular, early morning thing. Someone said that if we were all to take our problems and put them in a pile, many of us would take our own problems back. When we see
what
the problems
Yes.
other people have dropped. We don't generally say, you know what, it's okay.
Right.
You know that these
hold
things
on.
that we talk about and we laugh about, they're things that a lot of people are still grappling with at this
Absolutely.
very moment, thinking that somebody's life is better than theirs. They are living. My friend used to say, Lolo, don't ever say you're not strong. I say, why? He said, you're pulling 2 jobs, you're doing mom and dad to your children.
Yes.
Some of us have husbands. The holidays I've ever seen you take are bankrolled by you. Me, my office has always paid for my vacations, paid for this, paid for that. But you have had to do it by yourself. So sometimes when the Bible even says that anybody that compares himself to another, it says you are not wise. Because no matter how it is, no 2 people's race is the same. You are not married to Tolu's husband. You don't know Catherine's life. You don't know her children. You don't know the work she has done.
Absolutely.
You don't speak French.
You have to know that in there.
And another thing is, comparison doesn't exactly give you room for gratitude. I remember last year, I was
almost
so
did
caught
this
up in
today.
No, let's do it. Let's do it. It's okay. Repeat that. Say it again.
Comparison doesn't give you room for gratitude.
Yes.
Last year, I was almost caught up in that web of, oh, what's this person doing? Should I toe this line? Should I do this? What am I doing to better my life? Which is good, right? But there was a time I was scrolling on Instagram, and there was this person that the first place I ever worked, we applied for the job together, and we're talking about how we become big, media girls and all that. And then I was scrolling through my feed looking for my achievement, and I saw her like on one of my photos. She's dead. Ooh. And then I just started crying. I'm like, I'm not grateful that someone else died, but like, could have been me.
Of course.
Ooh.
Guys, these are some of the thought-provoking.
Honestly, why
These
they
are
put us?
some
I put you in the mood today.
questions, and that was deep. The way Blessings landed on that. Some thought-provoking questions to start. What's going to be a thought-provoking conversation today, guys. Don't forget to join the discourse on social media. We're at News Central TV. Last week, the news of the deaths of Christiana Idowu in Nigeria and Rebecca Cheptegei in Kenya renewed discussions on violence against women and why so many women are dying at the hands of lovers, friends, family, acquaintances, and strangers. Now, when we come back on Jasiri, we will address the rising cases of femicide in Nigeria. Stay with us.
The World Health Organization estimates that at least 1 in 3 women have been subjected to either physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. On this table, I'm one of those 1 in 3 women. It's back in my past. But across Nigeria and indeed Africa, women face a growing and deadly threat simply because of their gender. This threat has the name femicide, the intentional killing of women, often motivated by misogyny, intimate partner violence, or cultural norms that devalue their lives. For decades, these killings have gone underreported, misunderstood, or even ignored. And in recent years, Nigeria has witnessed a sharp rise in gender-based violence. Behind each number is a face, a story, a life that's been cut short. These deaths are more than tragedies. They are preventable. They are a reflection of deep-rooted inequalities, harmful traditions, and a justice system that too often fails women.
Femicide has reached unprecedented levels across Africa. Now, in 2022, the continent reported the highest global rate of femicide. Systemic failures, weak legal enforcement, and cultural norms contribute to the increasing violence against women. It's reported that 76 women have been killed in Nigeria from January until now. But this is not an epidemic that came out of nowhere. Sadly, it feels like everywhere you go, every social media platform you enter, you most definitely see a hashtag calling for justice for yet another young girl or a woman whose life has been cut short. How did we get here? More importantly, how can we stop the cycle of violence?
And this is an alarm we must continue to sound. The conversation we all, as a nation and a continent, must prioritize and continuously have. To understand the crisis of femicide in Nigeria, we must first examine the forces that perpetuate this, from the influence of patriarchy and harmful cultural practices to legal and systemic failures that deny justice to victims. And joining us today to have this conversation, we have Chioma Agwegbu, the convener, State of Emergency, GBV, and the Executive Director of TechHer. Chioma, welcome to Jasiri.
Welcome, Chioma.
Welcome, Chioma.
Thank you. It's very lovely to be here. I'm a big fan.
Thank you for joining, and it's a pleasure to have you join us as well. Now, Chioma, femicide is not a word that we hear often, especially in this part of the world, but it's a word that we've been confronted by in the past week as the stories of murdered women come to us from different parts of the continent. Now, not like anyone is better off, but a lot of people tend to just categorize everything under gender-based violence. So for a better understanding of this issue, can you tell us the difference between femicide and gender-based violence?
Thank you. Great question. The first thing is gender-based violence encompasses every form of violence a woman or a girl will suffer because they're women or because they're female. And one of those forms of violence is femicide. Sometimes people talk about the triangle. They talk about the violence paradigm, and then you start from things like, or rape culture, you start from things like, misogynistic comments, you start from things like poor or harmful social norms, and then you work your way up to things like domestic violence, financial violence, emotional violence, sexual violence, physical violence, and you keep working your way up till you get things like femicide. But when you think about gender-based violence as a whole, femicide is a part of it.
All right, so I know that femicide is yet a term people are getting acquainted with, as interesting as that can be. So in as much as people accept these killings as femicide, you find comments about people who are saying that, okay, so this is perhaps a weak. People shouldn't be looking for how to change the conversation of a death into a gender war. So do you think in this stance, do you think that this particular stance waters down the gravity of what women are going through and refuses to acknowledge the problems that we have on our hands?
I think that people try to muddy the waters. I can be talking about a woman was killed, women are getting killed, girls are getting killed, and then someone else says, oh, this is a gender war. I always walk away from such conversations because it is very clear that this person who is talking about gender wars has no knowledge, probably doesn't have an education, regardless of how educated they might sound, and is just interested in canceling a very important conversation simply because what do the numbers say? 1 in 3 women will face violence in their lives. Women between the ages of 15 and 49 report that a percentage of them have suffered violence. When you think about who is committing this violence, and this is something I said on my LinkedIn, I think it was last week, that a lot of times we talk about, violence against women and girls as if it is spirits or aliens or chickens or goats that are committing the violence against them. Men commit violence against women. Men perpetrate violence against women. Interestingly, men perpetrate violence against themselves. Right? If you look at this case that's come out of France recently, and we will talk about Nigerian cases because there are millions of them. But if you look at the case coming out of France, a woman in her 70s was raped continuously over a decade, and for all intents and purposes, it could be more than a decade. And her husband was inviting men,
Yes.
right? Inviting men to come and rape his unconscious wife. This is his wife who he had drugged, who was unconscious. He invited over 100 women, over 100 men. 92 of them came, according to reports that have been put out. 92 of them raped this woman. 92 of them went away. 3 people said no. None of these 3 reported to the police. None of the over 90 men who showed up to the house, including their neighbor,
Yes.
who was always polite to her, none of them said, you know what, I don't want to have sex with a woman who's asleep. I don't want to have sex with a woman who is unconscious. This is rape. None of them. So when we say things, so when I hear things like not all men, gender wars, show me the not all men in that number. 90 is a big number.
Yes.
90 naira is a big number. 90,000 naira is a big number. 90 human beings partaking in rape is a massive, reprehensible number. And none of them said, this thing doesn't seem right. So when you talk about gender wars, one of the first cases I worked on in Nigeria around sexual and gender-based violence was in 2018. And a 3-year-old girl, pardon me being a bit graphic, a 3-year-old girl was raped by a 70-year-old man. The mother of this girl, and I'm not telling you a story I heard, I spoke to the mother of this child. The mother of this child saw the 70-year-old man inside her child. And she said to me, I can't sleep. This incident happened in 2018. We are in 2024. There has been no justice for that child. She was 3 then. Imagine how old she is now. Was she raped by a woman? No. What do the statistics say about the chances or the potential for a 3-year-old to be assaulted? I remember in 2009, there was an issue with a 4-year-old being raped by the headmaster of the school. And journalists went to the hospital in solidarity before the court case. And they asked, we're here to see the 4-year-old that was raped. And the receptionist said, and I quote, which of them?
Hey.
They're like, no, the 4-year-old that was raped by the headmaster. And they said, yes, I heard you, but which of them? I was on that trip. So I'm not telling you stories that I've heard. I'm telling you things that I've witnessed. We cannot have conversations about gender wars when in 1 week, globally, from Uganda to Ethiopia, to France, to Nigeria,
India.
we are not only seeing violence against women, we are seeing an institutional reversal of the rights and protections that women have.
Okay,
and the only thing some people want to discuss on social media is gender wars. It doesn't track.
Choma, I need you to hold on. I don't know how many people are aware of the story that Choma has referenced in France. I've been following it very closely. Even as you mentioned it, I have goosebumps right now. And I think it's necessary for us to emphasize that they live in a small community of about 6,000 people. 90 men were arrested in a community of 6,000 people for partaking. There was even an HIV positive man who went back 3 times to rape this woman. And we have to put it out there. And I also have to applaud, her name is Giselle, I can't remember her surname. I have to applaud her because France has a law where they do not identify victims of sexual assault. And she said that no, she wants her name out there so that the names and the pictures of the men would also be out there as well. Wow. So in this case, you've mentioned France. India, it was a doctor who was on duty, who went to sleep, who was raped and killed. And then we hear everything that I think the hospital director was saying. Ethiopia, South Africa. Ethiopia, Rebecca was set on fire. In South Africa, a man killed his common law wife. Nigeria, we see the statistics and we see these people, but they're not just numbers to us. But let's talk about a few numbers now. A United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Research found that more than half of women and girls who are killed globally died at the hands of an intimate partner or a family member, which equals to a woman or girl being killed every 11 minutes in their home. By the time we finish this show, more than 4 or 5 women would have died in their homes because of the conversation we're having, or in the context of the conversation we're having. While we can see that many women are therefore not safe at home, women are not safe in religious institutions, we're not safe on public buses, we're not safe in schools, we're not safe in markets, we're not safe with our friends, our colleagues, our fellow students, our family members. But it comes back to a lack of value that we place on women's lives and agency. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So Chioma, how do cultural and social norms, particularly in Nigeria, contribute to the high rates of violence against women?
You know, before I answer that question, you said something that really, really touches my heart. You said women aren't safe anywhere. And maybe I should talk about the reason why, I convened the state of emergency GBV movement. So my father and my mother are gospel ministers, right? And they have been for over 30, maybe going on 40 years. And so on the 3rd of June, 2020, when we heard that Waila had passed on from injuries suffered in a church, this was during COVID, there was lockdown, she was a student, she decided to go into a church to study, right? And men came in, not chickens, not goats, not aliens. Men went into that church, met her there, brutally raped her, hit her over the head with a fire extinguisher, and she died from her injuries a few days later. So you tell them to stay at home. Barakat was raped at home in her father's house in Ibadan. She was wearing a full hijab. Waila was raped in a church. This little girl I'm talking about was raped at home. She was 3. So all of the things that people throw up, and when you say values, I wonder if it's as much as the value placed on women and girls as it is the fact that we don't have consequences. The fact that we do not have consequences that are a deterrent enough. If your child, and a number of us on the, in this conversation have children, or at least have proximity to children, if a child does something wrong and you flick them, right, or you smack them, or you put them in the naughty corner, there's a direct correlation between the offense and the consequence. They will probably do it again because they are babies and because they are really young. But you have established, if you do this, this fun is going to be removed from you, or you are going to be removed from this fun. When we do not punish sexual and gender-based violence swiftly, commensurately, and without regard for proximity to power, political affiliation, ethnicity, and all of the silly things that come up in a lot of our countries, we tell people that, you know what, as long as you have money, or as long as you are close to the party in power, or as long as you can twist it in such a way. I remember that a few years ago, a young lady accused a popular musician of raping her. And the media, who can be unfortunately very complicit in these matters, published, in telling the story, published a picture of the girl wearing party wear. She'd gone to a party. They went to her Instagram or something and took a picture of her in very racy party wear, and then published a picture of this musician who is often shirtless in a three-piece suit. You have already colored the minds of everybody who sees that story, because the first thing they're going to think, look at how she's dressing now. And we are not far from judgment in this country. We all agree.
No.
Oh, Chioma, this question, this is a very uncomfortable conversation that we're having this morning. So we're still staying in line with this particular one, because you just said something. How do the societal attitude towards women and our gender roles, because some people would even discriminate against a woman for being ahead of them in the office. And that already puts her in the eye of the storm. Some will look at her even in the market space and would say, I have seen women who have been discriminated because of their beauty. It's a lot. So I'm wondering that, how does our gender roles, and generally how the society perceives us women, and now, how does this influence this issue of femicide in Nigeria? And one of those things that really bedevil us is the fact that it affects how we report.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. Everybody is talking about their own. If I would share a girl who called me on radio that year and said she was going for WAEC in Ikorodu, and she was raped in an uncompleted shop by one of the goons in the area that everybody knows. We were going to take it up, and the parents called me in camera and off camera and said no, that they do not have the ability to be able to follow up with whatever might come out of this. So look at that. And how are we able to reconcile both reporting and even intervention? Is it not until recent years we started talking about rape kits in police stations because we started insisting and talking about it? Some of them some stations might not even have a rape kit there to be able to take on the spot assessment of a rape victim without casting aspersion on the girl first. Because recently we heard of, it's just happened in this Lagos too, that a police officer in his office
raped a girl.
Chioma,
let's pause for a moment. We have a break. I want you to hold on to that question. We'll take it up when we come back after this. Do stay with us. You're watching Jasiri, and the conversation today is looking at addressing the rising incidences of femicide in the country. Now, right before the break, Lola was asking our guest about the societal attitudes towards women and gender roles and how they influence the occurrence of femicide in Nigeria. How do these perceptions also affect reporting and intervention? I'll also add, Chioma, a case that came, I think it was sometime last month, about the landlord's son who raped a girl here somewhere again in Lagos, unfortunately. And the police, Lagos State Police public relations officer said they went to investigate, and nobody in the compound, nobody around was even willing to give some information. So let's look about how all of those affect the ability for us to intervene, to report, and these societal attitudes that may unfortunately be the holdovers of how we look at what happens to women.
Thank you. I think the first thing to say is more numbers, right? Between 2020 and 2023, Nigeria recorded over 27,000 cases of sexual and gender-based violence in 5 states and the FCT. So call it 6 states. 6 states between 2020 and 2023. But I want to say that this number is high, but this number is probably 1/10 of the people who have been abused, who have suffered violations, who have suffered any form of violence in the same period. Why? Because our structures do not support reporting, our structures do not support justice, our structures do not support consequences for perpetrators. I spoke about a 3-year-old who was raped in 2018. This is 2024. Nothing has been done. The police have tossed the mother of this child back and forth. At some point, they told her to collect 70,000 naira from the son of this, I think it was 25,000 naira from the son of this 70-year-old man, because they said, oh, he's old, he will soon die. And she said, when I go to sleep, I see this man inside my child. What is 25,000 naira going to do for me? I want justice so he doesn't do it again. When we talk about violence, when we talk about the fact that the society supports violence, on social media, I think it was last year, we saw a young man, Killer Boy, that's his nickname, confess to murdering his girlfriend. He finished confessing, he fled the country. The brother to this young lady who had been brutally murdered and chopped into pieces followed him to another African country, notified the Nigerian police, look at where this boy is, arrest him, this person killed my sister. He has confessed live on social media. Till today, Killer Boy is walking free. When you talk about the fact that in areas, and oh, by the way, let's talk about the societal response to that. They said things like, oh, when she was spending his money, didn't she know that he could murder her? When she was collecting gifts, when she was riding in fancy cars, etc., etc. It is almost as if, the society sees death or femicide as a consequence for women living a good life with their partners. So it seems like the society believes that, oh, if you can enjoy with him, is it not small death? He just killed you now, or he just stabbed, or he just did this, or he just did that. There's almost always that correlation. What has she enjoyed with this person, and why can't she suffer? And then the same society turns around to say that women are posting, or women are saying these things are gender wars. How won't I say it is a gender war when it is my gender that's getting killed by your gender? The numbers support it, the statistics support it. Women are dying literally every day. As a matter of fact, women are more likely to die from intimate partner violence than they are going to die from, for instance, getting knocked down on the streets. This is the person you have pledged your life to or said you want to be in an intimate relationship. You are more at risk of dying at the hands of that person than any danger you can meet outside.
All right, Chioma, I'm glad that you even mentioned this, because I was going to come to the societal response to gender-based violence and, of course, femicide. I can safely say that the society has failed when it comes to responding to some of these issues, because we're still stuck up in the what were you wearing, why did you go there accusations, when these issues are literally palpable. We can see it. I mean, I'm not even going to go into the story of the time that I got into a bus and someone followed me in there, and it was as though it was a normal thing, like why would he follow you if you weren't looking for trouble, that kind of situation. And it's just so sad that we found ourselves there. But that's on the part of the society. We also know that there is a judicial part to play, and Amnesty International Nigeria has flagged the slow pace of investigations. Like you talked about the 3-year-old child whose mother is still yet to get justice, and they've also talked about the prosecution, the slow pace of prosecution in recent femicide cases in the country. Now, Amnesty also accused authorities of not rigorously pursuing lines of investigations and further endangering the lives of the women and girls with these failures. And that's why some women and girls refuse to even come out, because their lives are in danger whether or not they speak up. Now, how is the law and the authorities failing Nigerian women and girls? Why does it seem so difficult to get justice for these people, further exposing them to more dangers? Because if you go to report a man who abuses you violently and nothing is done, and both of you are let loose in society, there's every chance that that man would not give you a second chance to report him again.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, because the truth is, government is the biggest distributor of development in any society. There's only so much that civil society, not-for-profits, and the NGO sector can do. The government, who have the mandate from the people, are the biggest distributors of development. So let's look at some information out of Nigeria. We have something called a Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which was passed or signed into law in 2015 by former President Goodluck Jonathan. What's interesting to know is that this piece of legislation used to be called the Violence Against Women's Act. What's also interesting to know is that the advocacy for this law to be signed into, for this bill to be signed into law in 2015 took almost 15 years. It suffered many many alterations which watered it down. And it was then renamed because legislators at the time said, if we call it Violence Against Women's Act, it will be discriminatory against men. So they then watered it down, called it the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, and that's how it got passed into law in 2015. In 2020, when we started the State of Emergency GBV movement, one of our biggest priorities was to ensure that this piece of federal legislation, which is the most robust piece of legislation on sexual and gender-based violence, was domesticated by Nigeria's 36 states. And what happened? We are in 2024. We began this, this advocacy, of course, joined or supporting, organizations across the country who have been pushing for the domestication of this act, for the longest time, since 2015. We're in 2024. One northern state has still not domesticated this act. Several states have domesticated versions of this act where they have watered it down, where they have changed language, where they have changed consequences for perpetrators of violence. And the most interesting thing to mention is that we are in 2024 still complaining about the fact that this act is not as strong as it could be. Enter a legislator from Kogi State who now says he wants to repeal the act. As a matter of fact, in the in what the press published, they said he talked about that legislators were hoodwinked into signing the 2015 Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act into law, and so he wants to repeal it and reenact it. The problem with that is Nigerian legislators have a very poor history of consulting with their constituents and the people who actually voted them into power. And so civil society and people are saying, is this the most critical issue right now? As a matter of fact, because of the amount of violence we are seeing in Nigeria and violence across, violence against women across the country is actually increasing in some places from 20-something% up to 40%. Instead of us to be talking about ways to strengthen the laws we currently have, a legislator is trying to repeal the only piece of legislation that is robust enough to cater to all, the forms of sexual and gender-based violence in the country. As a matter of fact, one of the provisions in this bill that he's put out, to repeal the existing act, removes the provision of institutional protections for women in the workplace.
Wow.
So what are we saying? We have a living, breathing problem in Nigeria. We are signatories to the Maputo Protocol, yet we are failing, not only as a country, but we are failing to lead the continent in protection of women and girls.
Choma, I'm so sorry, Catherine, because she has a question, but it's interesting. Two things you said. We will be talking about the attempt to repeal the VAP Act tomorrow. We'll actually have somebody coming in to discuss that with us. But you mentioned that there's a jump from 20% to 40%. And it makes me ask a question about how we've seen the economic situation. I know there is some research that links economic inequality and economic instability to rising cases of gender-based violence. I quickly want you to talk about that. What does poverty, lack of education, economic instability, how do they possibly exacerbate the risk that women face when it comes to gender-based violence? What about also economic inequality that we see here in our country? What role could that play?
To be honest, sometimes I think that everything is rigged against women. I mean, as a matter of fact, sometimes we say that from the time a girl child is born, she starts the race to constantly escape violence for the rest of her life. She's trying to escape FGM. She's trying to escape, child sexual molestation. She's trying to escape not being sent to school because her brothers are being prioritized over her. She's trying to escape sexual violence all through her time in education. She's trying to escape sexual harassment in university, in her workplace, etc. And then all of these things I've mentioned are then exacerbated by poverty, by hunger, by climate change. Because when a family is unable to earn as they should, we have situations like in Cross River State where girls would be given away when a man takes a loan. A man takes a loan, cannot pay. He says, okay, take my daughter, take my wife, take my sister, do with them as you please. Take them in as payment for this loan. These things are caused by poverty, but they're also exacerbated by cultural norms that say it's okay, that women are chattel, that girls are chattel and can be used, in exchange for goods and services that cannot be paid for. When we talk about poverty, we talk about frustration. And there's a lot that hasn't been done to explore the mental health of Nigerians, including men. And so a man goes to the workplace. This is why you get to the office sometimes and you hear someone say, I can't take orders from a woman, but you can take orders from a man. We hear that men beat their women because they're frustrated. But when your boss in the office, who is a man, frustrates you, you don't beat him. As a motor park tout or as a bus driver or as someone who works on the street, you have a bad day at home, you bring it home and you beat up your wife. Why? Because there is no consequence. We talk about value, etc. You know that if you try to pick a fight with your fellow motor park tout or your fellow taxi driver or your fellow whoever it is you work with, they'll probably beat you into the ground. But you then see that, well, I can go home and I can beat my wife and nothing will happen. After all, she's the weaker vessel. And our religions, Christianity, Islam, our traditional religions all contribute to the subjugation and suppression of women and girls. We're told we can't be, we can't be heard. We shouldn't even be seen. Right now, there's a lot of advocacy about women leading, across religions. And it's facing a lot of pushback because it goes against the very grain that these people should just sit down. And this is why whenever I hear gender roles, I get really irritated because you are trying to tell me that my entire essence is supposed to be confined to a kitchen and your bed. I mean, you look at our country and a former president saying that his wife, a whole wife of the president, a complete human being, is for the other room. And it became a joke, but we underestimate the way, little quips like this roll back years and years and years of work to advance women and girls. His administration saw one of the greatest regressions of any politics.
No, Choma is preaching today.
Listen, I just wanted to touch on this because this is in tandem with what you're saying. While it's important that we're highlighting the cost of femicide and gender-based violence here in Nigeria, I'm interested in the impact on families and communities. You're talking about it, so I just want you to just add that in your responses. How does femicide affect women's rights and empowerment in Nigeria? Because you were just talking about that right now.
In 2019, and I have stories for days. In 2019, I was part of after the Not Too Young to Run Act was signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari on the 31st of May, 2018. We then started something called, Ready to Run for young people who were going to run for office. And we worked with young women who were running for office. And I remember one of them, a young lady in Lagos State, she was going to run for State House of Assembly. And she had been told, you need to consult widely, etc. So she went to the, one of the heads of her community and she said, oh, my father said I should come and talk to you. I'm running for office, blah, 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 blah. And he told her to climb his table. And she said, no, I don't. No. Maybe you didn't hear me well. Maybe there's miscommunication. I came to tell you so that I'm running for office. I need your support. These are my plans for the community. And he said, yes, she should climb his table. Let him see what she wants to use to run. And she refused very vehemently. This man beat her up. Again, I wasn't told this story. I didn't read it in a newspaper. This person spoke with us. This person beat her up so much, she left with her shirt torn. And so when we told her, we were bursting with energy. We said, listen, let's go to court. Let's report to the police. Let's do this. Let's do this. We were on fire. And she said, when we finish, I have to go back and live here. Just exactly, one of you talked about something like that. She said, I have to live here. This is still my community. And this is not even about me running again in the future. This is about my life. This is about my family. So femicide, and of course, she didn't run again in 2023. She's just gone quiet. Femicide not only contributes to, femicide, it takes us back. We have instances where women say, you know what, this thing is too much for me. This thing, femicide, in addition to taking the life of the person, it inadvertently takes the lives of others because only a fool will tread where you have seen others die. If you ask this young lady, will you run for office? She'll be like, my dear, the one that happened to me the last time, I don't know. This isn't for me. In 2020, after the elections, we gathered a lot of the young women who had run for office and we had like a review session with them. I tell you, there was not a dry eye by the time the women finished telling their stories. Not a dry eye. And I'm talking about all of us who were women in the room and the one or two men, even the people who were, who were supposed to be filming. At some point, they had to stop. What are you doing with this type of horror that we're capturing? Femicide not only takes the life of the person that has been taken, it takes the lives of other women because it shows us that there is death in front. It shows us that there is violence in front. And we don't want to add, this new violence to all the other forms of violence that we are trying to escape in our lives. So we don't go. And so when you then talk about why don't we have more women in politics, when you talk about why don't we have more women in leadership positions, look at this lady who reported about being sexually harassed in university. She's now known as the woman, who took that lecturer's job, not the survivor of sexual harassment. It's now being said, oh, she reported him and he lost his job. You never escape the stigma. And I must say that this is why when a lot of times when people say, oh, women report, women always make false reports, there is no upside. There is no upside to reporting. Look at this young lady, Shaitan, who alleged against the popular musician D'banj. She hasn't recovered, and this is how many years after. Even people who tell these stories, look at Kiki Modi and the sex or grade story that she did. Up till today, you still have animals trolling her online and referencing a story that she did about men sexually harassing women. And then the same people come back and say gender wars, which is why it's very exhausting for me. Because really, what are we doing?
Chioma, we cannot have you exhausted. That's the point. At the end of the day, with conversations like this, every single person who's going to speak up, who's going to be a voice in the darkness, will reach those points. Will reach that point of being exhausted, but the fight must continue. And as you said earlier, you're the convener of State of Emergency GBV. And my question to you as we start wrapping up is, what happens if Nigeria doesn't quickly and even more adequately address the issue of gender-based violence and the rising cases of femicide that we're seeing in our society? And there's a point, I don't know who made it here, that when you report the first time, like you report to the police station, and then a lot of men will not give women a second opportunity to report. The most dangerous time for survivors of domestic violence is when they're leaving. And many victims of sexual violence or even domestic violence will attempt to leave at least 9 times before they even leave. And I gave a statistic earlier that a woman is killed in her home every 11 minutes. In the whole course of today's conversation, 5 women will have died before we finish today's conversation. What happens if Nigeria doesn't address this and address it adequately?
A few years ago, Hinil Morin got a message about a job interview. On the way to that job interview, she was kidnapped, she was violated, and she was killed. She represents thousands and thousands of women who are looking for work. She represents thousands and thousands of the millions of Nigeria who are either underemployed or unemployed and will continue going to places for work. So what does femicide do? It stops people from going to job interviews. It stops people from running for office. It stops people from living full lives. It stops people from thriving. Your entire existence is then based on survival. It stops people from entering taxis, for God's sakes, because you are not sure if you are entering One Chance today, or if you are entering a kidnapper's taxi today, or if you are entering a ritualist's taxi today. It stops the advancement of society, because whether we like it or not, and I hate to use this trope, you cannot wash both hands with one hand. A society that is made up of men and women is not going to succeed if only one section of that society is advancing, and if that one section of society is allowed to keep or to continue perpetrating violence against women. The other thing I'm going to say is that in 2023, TECA launched this portal where people can report online gender-based violence. It's called Kura. And one of the things that we've seen, in addition to the fact that the online gender-based violence is spiraling and is skyrocketing, is that these men who are perpetrating violence against women online are now perpetrating violence against men online. So in addition to the women, the tens and tens of women who have been reporting to us, we now have men saying, oh, a man is blackmailing me. A man is extorting me. A man is doing this. Again, I come back to that thing about gender wars. Men are committing crimes against women. Men are committing crimes against men. So why don't we call it what it is? My mother says, call sin by its name so that you know where you're asking God for help. Why aren't we calling it by its name? Why do we keep saying violence against women and not male violence against women? So that when we're thinking about remedies, when we're thinking about support, when we're thinking about consequences, we are addressing the target group that is perpetrating this violence.
Wow, honestly, I can sit down and listen and just continue to glean from the wisdom you've been bringing. This conversation has been very heartbreaking, trust me. We're all sat on this chair and everybody just shaking their heads. Nigeria is failing to protect literally half of its population. We must collectively use our voices to demand action on femicide and gender-based violence, and use our positions to advocate for societal change. We need to say thank you, Chioma Agwegbo, for this beautiful conversation. She is the convener of State of Emergency, GBV, and the Executive Director of TechHer. We want to say a very big thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you again and again to discuss, progress on this particular issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shoma.
Thank you for having me.
Honestly, ladies, I know we're about to wrap up, but sometimes when you begin to hear the statistics of these things, we know the stories.
Yeah.
But the statistics
It's even
begin
scary
to shock
think
you.
that 1 in 3 women
And that's
are abused.
underreported.
And that's
Underreported.
underreported. That means that 1 in 3 men are the ones perpetrating this violence.
Anyway, today's conversation with Chioma Agwegbo has really left.
Catherine, you don't have anything to say? You're taking it all in.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's just left me wondering how we want to change our society for the better, for the girls and the women. I'm sure it had left many, many out there wondering as well that what can we do to protect the women in our lives. And that is why Jasiri is in place. We're always here every 10 o'clock from WAT time, that's West African time, and we're here Monday through Friday. We promise you conversations that will make you think, inspire you, and of course, most of the time make you laugh. So meet us right here again at New Central, but we'll see you again tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Ladies.
Yo, bye guys.
I'm taking it in.
Man.
No.